toward the total revenues of the Sewage and Water Board for drainage, and trying to improve the fairness of the way the monies are collected without increasing the burden on those customers is key. And this relates directly to it, but a second goal is to begin to collect some revenues from tax-exempt properties. There are large tax-exempt properties that place great demand on the Sewage and Water Board for drainage service right now and drive the capital program too, who don't pay anything toward drainage because they're tax-exempt. The third goal is to acknowledge private investment in the drainage program and infrastructure through a credits program. So if you think about the analog of a water utility, someone who installed a water-saving toilet has the opportunity to be helpful to the Sewage and Water Board, the service provider, and see their water bill go down because of their own efforts toward water conservation. You can do that with a stormwater utility as well by acknowledging private investment in on-site infrastructure by ratepayers in the community, and essentially to draw down the bill that they pay for stormwater because of their private investment, and that's the credits program. And the fourth goal is to provide an affordability program for customers. Right now, there's an affordability program for the current funding method through the 3 millages that relates to the homestead exemption. So owner-occupied residential properties who avail themselves of the homestead exemption have a reduced or eliminated stormwater cost through that. And a stormwater program that had a fee based on impervious area or something like that would need to have an affordability component as well to help folks who cannot otherwise afford the bill. So with those as our goals, let's talk implementation process. The process for implementing a drainage fee is different everywhere we go. And I said earlier, we've helped about 75 communities, including some big cities, some coastal communities, places with lots of flooding. One that we helped implement pretty recently was Corpus Christi, Texas. We just helped to get Boston Water and Sewer Commission's fee out about a year ago. And the process is different everywhere, but in a lot of places like North Carolina, where I'm from, a drainage fee can be implemented by a majority vote of city council for a public utility, and they just do it. Whereas in Louisiana, and specifically for the Sewage and Water Board, it's a legally defined process, and the Sewage and Water Board's legal staff have evaluated it and say the absolute minimum length of time to go through all the steps would be about 8 months. Well, it takes more than 8 months to do all the data work and program planning and rate making and billing system stuff and all that on the kind of tech side, but it's an 8-month legal process that would include at least 3 public hearings by rule, but we think 7 would be ideal. And the process is going to require specifically and sequentially approvals from the City Council, the Board of Liquidation City Debt, the State Bond Commission, the Secretary of State, and then finally the voters of the Orleans Parish. So very, very defined here. There are other places we work that require voter approval for a fee like this, but there aren't that many. California is one. So a very specific implementation process here for the Sewage and Water Board. So that influences the pathways for a successful implementation a little bit too. And what we find is, having done this, working with a lot of folks in a lot of places, is some of the keys here are that we need champions and interested stakeholders who are talking about the need for more fair funding, more funding, new ways to pay for things, extensive education. A stormwater fee is far less understood by the typical citizen anywhere you go. It's not a metered service. It's paid for through taxes right now. A lot of folks don't even realize some of their tax monies are going toward drainage. So lots of education and opportunities for input. And that is to say that the idea that you would, you know, pre-select every detail about how it's going to work and then pounce and educate, it needs to be a little more iterative than that. There have to be opportunities for input. And it's tricky because when it's hard to explain, you kind of need to get out there and say, this is what we want to do, and here's why it's good for everybody. But you have to leave opportunities for folks to influence at least the details of how it works. Clear messaging on how it would work and a clear value proposition. At a certain level, it's not hard to explain why a lot of money is needed for drainage management in New Orleans, but the value proposition is still critical. And then again, because it's not a metered service, transparent and correct billing is really, really tricky and an important cornerstone. If you're charging ratepayers based on their runoff, the surrogate for that is impervious area perhaps, then a way to make it clear that you're not making it up, the bill is correct, it's based on real data for each ratepayer's property is really key. So if you dive one click lower than that and get into some of the tactics, really, we think the correct tactics here, given everything we know, are that we need a detailed plan and timeline for the services, the cost, the dates it would go in, is it phased in, make those details widely available and provide opportunities for feedback, to roll out a website where any ratepayer or customer can look at how the rate structure and the rates would affect them specifically. And we'll do a little demonstration on that's kind of differently done in different places, but one place we recently did a fee finder website is in Boston, and Nora's going to show you that on the very next slide. In-person community meetings we think are really important and spread across the city. One-on-one meetings with large customers give them the chance to see exactly how it would work for them. Information videos and branded education. And when I said earlier, the legal process could not go faster than about 8 months. To roll this out tactically with these things would take more than 8 months. And in particular, the Fee Finder website could be something that existed during other forms of outreach and education, and we give folks comfort that, you know, the computational side of it is correct. So that's tactically some of the things. Nora, if you want, why don't you grab the screen and just demonstrate the way that a Fee Finder website would work for a couple minutes.
Sure. So this is the Boston Water and Sewer Commission Fee Finder. And so you just navigate to BWSC's stormwater page, and they have some additional information about their stormwater program and why they want to implement it and what it's for. And then if you click on this bill estimator, that's what the Fee Finder is called here, it'll take you to this page where you can either zoom in and navigate to the parcel that you're interested in, or you can search by the address or parcel ID. So we pulled out a couple examples to show you all. This is Boston University, so big parcel, a lot of impervious area. And if you click on the parcel, it brings up some parcel details, including the ID, the bill class stormwater type, impervious area, and the ERUs for that parcel.
And the ERUs are the billing unit for this utility. So this ratepayer at 685 Commonwealth Avenue, they have 163 units of impervious area, and that's going to feed into what their drainage bill would be.
Yeah.
Back to you, McKinley.
Thank you. And so if you click on the bill estimator, it'll take you to this page, and they charge their stormwater bill on the utility bill. So it automatically populates their ERUs, and then it'll show you the stormwater charge here as well. And if a customer knows their consumption, they can type that in here and it'll show them their water and sewer charges as well. Couple additional examples, large public parcel. This one is about 83 ERUs. The tall hotel has about 7. And then
And
this parcel.
Everybody probably realizes this, but the blue things on this overlaid here are the measured impervious surfaces on the parcels. And we measured those to create the database from which the bills are calculated. That same database feeds the bill estimator site.
And then one of the last one, this one has about as much pervious area as a single family property in Boston. And so it only is charged 1 ERU. Maybe about $9 up there. Back to you, Keith. That's all I had for this
Okay, one. And you know, this website is live and it's public, so any other questions on here, we're happy to answer. And you can see the keys here are that a customer can go and see what their bill will be given draft rates. They can see what their combined utility bill would be and how much it changes if they know their consumption for Boston. And perhaps most importantly, they can see that an effort was made to calculate an individual amount for them that is based on the characteristics of their property. And in my experience, that has often been the highest hurdle for implementing drainage fees is, like I said earlier, there's not a meter out there. It's not a tax if you're doing a fee based on impervious area. So conveying this sense that you know what you're doing, you figured out what to charge them, it makes sense and it's right, is really key. And so we think in the case of New Orleans, having a bill estimator or a fee finder website out long before the fee is implemented is a great outreach and education mechanism, but it has to be done in a way that you're not painted into a corner because you're not done yet, but you're trying to move the educational process along by getting the data out there. And that's the end of our presentation, and I apologize, that was about 18 minutes.
That's okay. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation, and I just wanted to say to everyone here that, you know, we wanted to, I would say, bring back this issue. We haven't discussed it in a long time, and the context of which we were discussing it previously was around a lot of analysis of rates and fees and the money side of things. And we thought it would be really helpful to really focus more on today on what it would take to implement this and kind of what's kind of in the background and how do we get to the point where we can have conversations about money and fees, which I think are the hard conversations. And so I think this was great. You know, I would love to hear from the group. I started making notes on the presentation, and, you know, just 2 notes that really popped out for me was under the pathways to successful implementation is transparency about what this pays for. You know, and probably that a little bit is in the value proposition, but also that's always what people want to know, like, what is it actually going to pay for? And then, you know, under tactics, we're just seeing this more and more as we have to have a communication strategy around every new thing that we roll out. And so that may be, these tactics may fall under that, but there's sort of a bigger comm strategy. And we find that if we don't do that, we're not successful. And so that is a, you know, I think a considerable input that we just acknowledge now, that we have to maintain. So those are my comments, but, you know, the idea here is to have some conversation about this and, you know, just have some more background for the board and start figuring out, you know, how and when do we start to move this forward? Janet?
Okay, our first deadline, I mean, we have the millage expiring, what,
Into 27.
end of 27. So that means we collected for 27 and then it's over, right?
Right.
So that's our hard deadline.
Have we already targeted which election we need to, is our last election opportunity?
What would make sense really is to aim for next year being your target year because it's the first year of a 4-year term. And the time has come and it's going to take a long time there's a lot of work involved. I mean, Raftela's team made it look simple, but there's a lot of work ahead of us, including the technical piece. And you're going to consume all 26 for sure before you get there, politically and technically. So to implement it in 27 and get ahead of the expiration is the right thing to do. So that's why we're trying to keep it front and center, continue to do work so it doesn't fall off like it has in the past.
And not to mention that we'll have a new executive director.
New executive director, you have a new mayor, new makeup
Yeah.
in the council, probably newer board
Yeah.
in a few instances. So I think the time is right. Inheriting the small drainage fee system adds some complexity, but also urgency
Right.
to it. So, yeah.
I don't know.
Every time I think about this, I guess I think about it backwards. Like, you know, as a homeowner, I've done things in my house over the years that I thought about impervious surface area. I would have done things differently in the yard. It didn't occur to me. And now I'd have to sort of rip it all up and start over again, which would be cost prohibitive. I think that there is something to be said about explaining sort of retroactively how people are going to be affected by this, but also being intentional about talking about the people that are planning things. This is something you should consider and do because maybe it's not slotted to benefit you in this moment, but there are some possibilities in how we implement this in the future that would make it such that my fee would be different now. Had I done the resurfacing of my driveway area with a permeable concrete rather than how I did it. And I think that sort of proactive is separate from explaining to people that already sort of are stuck in their home and their lot and their place how this is going to affect them. It helps people know, like, if I'm doing something in the future, how do I make it so it doesn't affect me the same way then?
It also speaks to educating like contractors and, you know, landscape designers. I mean, this is sort of, I feel like the old water management conversations, but it's connecting it more deliberately to financial.
Well, I think it's actually an opportunity that we have due to the last 10 years of work in this space in New Orleans, that we have an ecosystem of nonprofits and advocates and contractors and designers who all are experts in this, but also are supportive of a fee that we can partner with in this campaign.
Yeah.
I think they would be enthusiastic to get on board. I think the sort of challenge I'm having thinking about this that I think Janet was starting to get to was, has there been, I'm sure there has been thought put into, like, how can we sequence this? Because you have, as we all mentioned, you know, we're gonna have new executive director, we're gonna have a new mayor, we're gonna have a new council, we have a millage that's expiring, and then we have this legal, exactly that.
But one thing stays in common, it's the need for it.
Of course.
Right? So,
But I think, like, I don't think any decisions have been made about, do we not ask to renew the millage and we ask for the fee instead? Or, you know, do we ask for the millage renewal earlier in case it fails so that we can sort of reorient and do something else? You know, how do we,
Yeah, I mean, we've done obviously behind the scenes some calculations to see what would be fair, and it's more likely than not that you're going to have a combination of millage and a fee
Yeah.
to maintain the level of, I'm going to call it burden on the current burden that doesn't increase on our residential properties, but at the same time bring into the fold a population that doesn't pay anything currently. And that's where the increase in revenue would come in predominantly.
That's a huge selling
Yes,
point.
absolutely.
But I thought this was, is this replacing the 2027 millage?
It
Is
can,
this in lieu or not? Because to go after a 2027 millage and go after a drainage fee at the same time,
That's exactly
don't
what I'm
see it.
asking.
there's multiple scenarios, and it's in the hands of obviously the public, but also who champions this and how much of a role does the Common Council, who's a critical piece of this. It's imperative that they buy into the structure and how it's structured entirely with how it's married with the millages.
do we have a structure? I mean, have we figured out what these
That's-
basics of what we're doing?
Yeah, no, I think this, so this is what I'm hearing, is that it may be up to us to put forth some scenarios, right? So yes, it's in the hands of the council, it's in the hands of the public, but we need to put forth some scenarios of what we're talking about. And if we're talking about a scenario that has both a millage and a stormwater fee, then we have to start talking about those things together and not separately, because they don't care that it's two separate streams. They care about, like, what's the dollar amount,
Right,
you know, and is that going to, how is that going to change for me?
correct.
Is it going to change?
It's in the hands of them in terms of their final decision-making power.
Right.
But it's in our hands to decide what we're going to ask them.
Yeah, it's not, I don't think we're putting for multiple scenarios. I think we've got to come up with a scenario.
The
And that's
ideal
what I think,
scenario. Yeah.
I was simply posing the question, has any decision been made? It sounds like no.
No, not at all.
And so I think it's up to us to make that decision.
Yeah, and
Not necessarily today, but
not to belabor it, but my advice would be to create some kind of, I'm gonna call it an ad hoc committee that includes folks from the city council, maybe the public, and then arrive at these structures and these models together. So you're not really proposing something that's going to be not supported by a key body that's gonna ultimately approve where it goes.
So that gets into, I think, looking at the Raftellus folks now, like your bullet about stakeholders and champions
Yep.
is, you know, who are they and how do we, you know, there are stakeholders and champions that will work with us, and there are stakeholders and champions that will deliver our messages,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to kind of be operating
Yeah.
at both levels.
A number of years ago, we had work done with Raftellus on a drainage fee, didn't we?
Yeah.
Are we still working on that basis, or is that gone at this point?
Well, I'll let Keith answer because he was involved in 2016,
Okay.
and he can answer it.
Well, that long ago, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, it was 9 years ago, and that was not the first time it was looked at, I think. So if I understand the question correctly, the answer is that the work that I did 9 years ago, I imagined that the most fair thing that would be able to generate the needed revenues, because we're not just trying to replace one millage that's expiring. We need more money than you've been getting for drainage. That my original work suggested to keep as many of the millages as you could and do a fee on top of that, which is what Gassan said. So that foundational piece has not changed. But the nuance is seeking ways to improve the fairness and drive up the revenue without charging more money to those who already pay a lot toward drainage because of their high tax value, whether they be residential or non-residential.
Mhm.
So that's been a lot more the focus lately is, are there ways we could do that? And so, and then recognizing that probably to try to renew the 6 mil, which is the one that expires in 2028. To try to renew the 6 mil while you're rolling out a fee on top of it seemed likely to fail. Smarter would be a fee that in aggregate with the remaining 2 mills would drive up revenues a little bit at first and more later.
So like a phased in approach?
Mhm.
That's kind of the norm. If you look at big, complicated places, and New Orleans is big and complicated, you know, they are more like places like Dallas, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. These are all places we helped implement fees, and they tended to be implemented with rates that were not the rates we knew we needed one day, but rates that would gradually drive up revenue, allow the utility to over time get to where they need to be without crushing anyone. Because as you know, when you're paying for drainage with millages, tax value defines someone's contribution.
Mhm.
When you're paying for drainage with impervious area, the combination blunts any starkness. But this shift in funding mechanism shifts who pays what, and it often has to be dealt with gradually to allow the customers to tolerate it.
And as we do this shift, I want to be very mindful about sort of the optics of who we're shifting the burden to. Because you don't ever want to sort of do this thing, and you know, when people push these consumption taxes, everyone knows consumption taxes overwhelmingly burden lower class or lower income persons. And so I just want to be very mindful about that as we look at these shifts.
That's the beauty of this,
Yeah.
actually, because the federal government will pay it if you create something
Mhm.
there. And I think they have about 15% of the property in the city. So you've got the universities free riding, you've got the churches, you've got all kinds of
People.
groups. So it's a much more fairer system than
Again, part of the communication strategy
Yeah,
is to
absolutely.
articulate this very clearly.
And-
Go ahead, Keith.
Well, I was just going to say, back to Philadelphia, one of the interesting things in Philadelphia is they were paying for drainage based on water meter size. So Sewage and Water Board is paying for drainage based on these millages. And we imagine a fee plus millages perhaps. In Philadelphia, they were paying for drainage based on meter size. So water customers with big meters were the big payers for drainage. They shifted to an impervious area and gross land area rate structure, which was phased in over a long period. And that changed. So their big payers were big water meters. And over time, their big payers became big property owners, big impervious area owners. Those are often not the same people. So specifically, if you think about downtown Philadelphia, all those high-rise hotels all have 12-inch water meters because every single room in it, the shower's running in the morning. They need a big water meter, but their footprint's pretty small. So their burden tends to drop over time as you shift to an impervious area and gross area. If you have millage funding now, those with large property values pay a lot. And as was pointed out, universities, federal property, the post office, the church don't. So there's a lot of effort that I think in the pathways to success to map out how the burden shifts. To the gentleman's point at the end of the table, you got to be really careful with this. And it's one reason we need an affordability program. There has to be a safety net that says if this shift in funding is hammering some ratepayers to the point where it really hurts them, there needs to be a way to help them financially through this, just like you would for other assistance programs for utilities.
Do you have a recommendation as to how this thing gets structured, or is that something that has to be done? I mean, in terms of ERUs there are about 5 different ways of measuring.
There's a lot of work that's been done by Raftalis on our behalf, and they're willing, obviously, to share it. The balance for us is how much you share publicly, which you then are subject to reaction by the customers who may understand, may not understand. I think, like you said, Robin, there's a lot of outreach one-on-one, especially with people who are going to be more impacted than others, like the Tulanes of our community. They're going to need a one-on-one sessions to educate them on the impact and approach before we can start about that publicly. But there's a lot of work that Raftalis has done, and they're equipped to answer a lot of questions that you may have.
So just a couple of things. I feel like we have this opportunity as a committee to take on initially maybe some of this thinking, if you all agree, that might be helpful to the new executive director, so that that when that person arrives, the board is starting to move this forward and has a plan to review with the new executive director.
Right.
About, and so it just allows for some continuity. We're not waiting for someone to come and saying, okay, what are you going to do about this? And so that's an opportunity. The idea of ad hoc, it can be through the work of the committee, or it can be ad hoc and include other people as well. I'm rolling off in a couple of months, so I'm not going to be able to see this through. So up to you all, kind of how you want to do this. But it just seemed like we got to start this now, including what you're talking about in terms of bringing people along about the investments they might be making today, and and how that might impact one day, their financial outlay for a stormwater fee and that sort of thing. So it's a lot, but maybe there needs to be an initial meeting to figure out, like, what's the list of things what are the questions that need to be answered? What are we going to be tackling? What's our goal as a committee to this?
Sounds good.
Who do you usually work with inside an organization on developing the plan?
I missed the very beginning. Did you direct that question to us?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Who do we usually work with?
My
So,
question,
yeah, so for a utility, we would work with the executive director, and then their communications folks are very key. Their financial folks, like Gray, are very key. And if they already have a handle on their revenue requirements for O&M and capital, then that's a little different than if they're also trying to imagine how their services would evolve over time. So sometimes we work with engineering type folks on capital programs. Sometimes we just consume that content from a utility that already has a plan. And then the other is ultimately, if you're going to have a component of the revenue generated from a fee, then you have to bill, collect, serve the customers, and maintain the data for a bill that is based on something to do with the property of each ratepayer, not metered, and subject to change based on demolition, new construction, subdivision, recombination, ownership changes, the construction of on-site stormwater controls. So you have to monitor the state or condition of the land and update the billing data as things change. And if that bill is going to be a new line item on a utility bill that is meter focused for water and wastewater, then there needs to be a marriage of technology platforms between the utility billing system and a parcel based, imagery based, measured thing. And I don't want to scare anybody. We do that all day long. And you just look at this website, the fee finder for Boston Water and Sewer. But all that blue stuff is stuff on the ground we measured. And when we get a new aerial image once or twice a year, we look for things that changed. And we consume content from building permits to say, parcel number 7 built something. I need to look at that when I get my new photo. And So that technology piece is huge, and it needs to be really, really right for the Sewerage and Water Board. There's a lot of public distrust of the meter to cash process, although that's gotten a lot better. We still think it's particularly important. And then the other thing is, the legal staff, the board committees, and outside stakeholders are all going to be key here. Tyler mentioned this earlier, but there is an enormous amount of energy in New Orleans towards sustainable development, and that has to dovetail right into this. This program has to be designed in a way that forward-thinking folks who are trying to build in a certain way and keep the city livable for a long time through climate change are rewarded through that private investment and see the impact on their bill. So I know I talked a lot there, but it's a
That's really
hard
helpful.
question.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have to wrap that up.
Yeah, I know. We have to wrap up because we have another committee meeting that needs to come in right now. So how do you all want to leave this? Do you want, this can be addressed at the next strategy meeting, or there can be,
I think this needs to be,
Yeah, this is our thing.
every time,
Every time.
this needs to be discussed.
okay.
I agree.
So this,
Keep it on the calendar for us to just keep talking about it and figure out a way to keep it moving.
okay, so maybe at the next meeting, we do this sort of list of what is it that we need answers to?
They gave us a list of questions.
Yeah, they already
Yeah.
did.
And I think staff should prepare
Okay.
answers to those that we can respond to.
I had intended to leave, but as part of my parting document is a recommendation and just sharing some history and
Okay,
who's been involved
okay.
and keep.
Well, the timing
people-
might work out then
Yeah,
for the next
Yeah,
strategy
I'll
meeting.
submit something for you.
Okay, and who knows, maybe I'll be around for the next strategy meeting. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so are there any, thank you so much. Just want to thank you, Keith and Henrietta, and Nora. Really appreciate it.
Thank y'all.
Thanks.
Are there any public comments?
No public comment.
Okay, if no other matters, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. We are now adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.